The overall story is like an allegory for queerness. But isn't it always a little bit weird that like underneath it all, like they are inherently more dangerous because they are vampires? Whenever people try to make that allegory, I always cringe a little bit because there's always going to be that slight justification of, yes, but they can still do X, Y, and Z.
Crazy Stupid Podcast.
Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, if this is your first time watching, we'd love it if you could hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell so that you are aware of when we post things.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Crazy Stupid Podcast. My name is Esther.
And I'm Adrian.
And today we're going to be discussing Interview with a Vampire Season 2, Episode 1 and 2. We finally
we made it.
Made it.
Armond might be my favorite character.
Oh, people were saying that we're going to really like him.
Yeah, I could tell.
I thought they did such a good job matching up what was happening in Claudia and Louis' relationship with what was going on in the world around them. After what happens with Lestat, and then also what Louis did to Claudia after what happens with Lestat, everything about their relationship in their world is kind of crumbling into instability. And then at the same time, the world around them is crumbling into instability.
Yeah.
And having them go to Eastern Europe instead of Western Europe was a really good choice, because there's also this idea that like they thought that getting rid of Lestat would give them stability. Like they thought he was the problem and that when you take him out of it, they'll be okay. And that's the same thing that Eastern Europe went through after World War II. You think, okay, the war is over. But he words it really well in the show where he says war was replaced by occupation.
Yeah.
I just like how they mirrored their interpersonal realities with the realities of their surroundings.
Yeah, because then Louis also says when the Nazis left, the Russians came in.
What do you think is going on with Louis? I don't really understand what's happening with him in these interviews with Daniel Malloy.
I don't know. I think the memory lapse, I feel like there's probably like a health condition that he's probably going through. I think there's always this question of like, why did Louis want to restart this interview with Daniel? I think it's sort of slowly revealing itself like they have two different motives. Daniel probably wants to reveal this like upcoming doom that's coming to the rest of the world. I do think Louis is probably trying to use this as like a bit of like an emotional exercise, like trying to re-jog his memory on the past that he's kind of slowly forgetting. I feel like that kind of tracks with where his character has always kind of been at. Like, I don't think Louis has been able to like let go of the past in various stages of his life. I think when he was first turned by Lestat, he was constantly looking back to the idea of what he had before. And so him longing to find out the vampires was clearly tied to like he kind of lost his family. Like he goes to Claudia because he felt like he lost his sister. And then I also think like him picking up photography also feels a little bit tied to that. Like I'm trying to capture memories, one, so that I won't forget it, but also not like an addiction, but almost like an obsession with the past, because like he's longing for something. And I remember even at one point in the episode when they're on their bicycles, Armond was like, hey, put the camera down and like be present with us. So it's like this idea of him trying to constantly capture something that he felt he lost a little bit. I don't know. I kept seeing a theme of regret, which they do mention in the narrative, and then also guilt, which can sometimes, those two things can be associated with the past as well.
I like that. I honestly didn't have an answer. Like when he was crying and he was like, you know, there was that moment where he was like, wait, no, that's not what it was. And he kind of has like this weird moment. Even Daniel Malloy seems kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
I was like, something's going on there. I like that idea though, because it does track.
I think he's probably tying his memory to his purpose, to his humanity a bit. And then if you're losing your memory, then like you're sort of losing like your humanity a bit, you know? And I think you can see that he gets frustrated when he can't remember things properly. And this kind of felt like a win when he was like, oh wait, I actually did remember this accurately this time.
That also means he's an unreliable narrator, but not because he like intentionally omits information. He's legit forgetting it, because he thanks Daniel in this episode for helping him remember what happened with Claudia.
Yeah.
Because I thought that was just him lying. I thought he just didn't want to talk about it. It sounds like he genuinely forgot.
Maybe there's a little bit of both. A little bit of, I want to tell it in a way that's a little bit more comforting. There could be an element of some intentionality there.
It also makes me a little bit suspicious of Armond.
You think he's like worried that Louis will tell too much of the truth?
Maybe like that scene with him asking for the pages that they tore out.
Yeah.
Because the things that Louis is omitting or forgetting seem to be also the pages that they decided to take out and not give Daniel access to for whatever reason. They still haven't really explained that, like why these specific pages. It makes me a little bit suspicious. And Armond was hesitant to give him access to those pages.
He said, we made an agreement.
Right.
I do think maybe Armond just might be a little bit nervous of like, if I were to just tell you 1 + 1 = 2 without giving you like the full scope of how we got to that conclusion, I think he's a little bit worried in the same way Louis was worried about how people might view Claudia. I
would agree with that, except that ripping out the pages and not giving him access to them at all is not giving him the full scope. To me, that's I feel
true.
Like they're kind of lying to themselves when they say that. Like giving him the full scope would be, here's what she said, and now listen to us explain it.
Yeah.
But just being like, take our word for it, and we're not even going to allow you to have access to her words, that's not giving the full scope.
And yeah, I think that is a little bit different with what Louis was doing when he tore the essay pages out.
Yeah, now I understand why Daniel Malloy wanted the pages, even those pages.
Yeah,
because
you can't always tell what's necessary, what things that could be omitted, and them just like spinning something to make themselves look a lot better.
I can't just take your word for it. I am excited. It looks like we're going to get possibly like a flashback to the first time they tried the interview, and I am very curious about that.
Something happened there, bro.
Oh yeah.
Also some sexual tension.
Oh yeah.
Freaking good. 69. Something happened between them, bro.
It didn't end well.
Yeah. Speaking of which, I knew something was tied with Armond and Lestat. I knew it. They did that little monologue when he's talking about Lestat, and then they do the reveal of Armond. So when you find out they had a little relationships between each other, I'm like, of course.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
See, this is the thing that actually turned out to not be true, I guess. But at the beginning of the episode, he talks about how Claudia is not dreaming, or she wrote that in her diary. And then later on, he's like, oh my gosh, I just remembered that she was. Going off of what she said in her diary, I think when she saw Louis turn on her because of what they had done to Lestat and because of how she was suggesting that they make it final, that was like an act of ultimate betrayal. Like this one person in the world that I really thought I could trust has just violated that trust. And it seems like even if she actually was dreaming, clearly in her words, she's trying to convey this lack of inspiration, this lack of purpose, because the person who she thought was going to give her purpose and be with her and support her for all of eternity has failed to do that. And I feel like, yes, she's looking for community. She's searching for other vampires because she wants to be amongst community, amongst other people. But also I think it's this question of like, I have all of eternity in front of me. What is my purpose in it? How do I find purpose in a never ending existence?
Yeah.
They find that woman, and essentially, she just says there is no purpose. She says, we own nothing. And then she falls into the fire.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't fall. She makes the choice to.
Geronimo.
The title of the episode is, what can the damned say to the damned? Even just that question is a question of like, what can we provide for each other? What type of purpose can we give to each other? And that's really what Claudia is looking for. And this woman essentially says, absolutely nothing.
Well, I would also add to that, it definitely feels like all of the vampires are searching for purpose. They seem arbitrary in a way, but I think it's tied to perhaps what the mother vampire is saying there. I think is intentional calling her that. Like she's clearly trying to like recreate a family or recreate children, right? Sort of tied to the name. So she keeps trying to turn and things aren't working out, but like she keeps trying. And then when she realizes it wouldn't work because whatever blood that they have in that area isn't working, she feels like she's kind of lost her purpose. I think Louis experienced that a lot in season 1. He kept trying to find purpose in like buying up land or building clubs or trying to find other vampires or trying to make this distinction of like, I'm going to only go after animals instead of humans, as opposed to what Lestat was doing. And I think you see Claudia doing that also, trying to find that purpose. And I do feel like all of their stories is just going to end in tragedy because of it. I think Claudia kind of exposed how arbitrary these missions for purpose are, because even when she asked Louis, like, well, if you're not going after him or you're not around me, then like, who are you? And he didn't really have an answer. I don't know what to make of that yet, though.
I think Louis does eventually find it. I think whatever him and Armand have been doing and up to is it. We just kind of haven't gotten to that part of the story. This is just a quick thing, but even just the little inclusion of the blood in Europe, and specifically Eastern Europe, being bad because of what the people had been through. We actually know from data that trauma, like, it impacts people on a cellular level.
Yeah.
Even just that little thing says a lot about what the story is trying to tell us about how our experiences impact us and our behaviors and everything moving forward, but how they also like literally impact us biologically.
And that being a metaphor with, you know, now you've turned into a vampire as well, and you've biologically changed. You're completely, that's a good point. I did want to talk a little bit about Louis' overall guilt. All right, here's the thing. I think Claudia's made a lot of bad decisions. Lestat has clearly made a lot of bad decisions. But I do think a lot of what this trio has experienced is that Louis kind of playing both sides here a little bit. And I do think both Claudia and Lestat are realizing it, which adds to the frustration that they not only feel for Louis, but against each other. When they're on that train and Louis looks to Claudia and was like, it's just me and you, I don't think he was being honest there, which is why Lestat showed up. This story ain't gonna end well. Because here's why I say that. The reason why I'm concerned about both Louis and Claudia is that the roles that they're both playing in the story have switched or changed. In this season, Claudia is really trying to find that sense of community because she has felt a level of disappointment in the one person that she has, which is very identical to what Louis was going through in season 1 with Lestat, where he's like, are there any other vampires out there? And then he wants Claudia to turn, and then they form a bond similar to the bond that Claudia is feeling with all the other people in France. And then this time around, Louis is a little bit closer to where Lestat was, where it's like, if I just have this one person, I'm content with it, which is kind of what he says to her, was like, if there was only just you and me in the world, like that would be enough, which feels very similar to what Lestat was saying to Louis in season 1. Louis not fully bought on to this mission that Claudia has, because I think that would feel like it would end the chapter in the book of him and Lestat, and he's not willing to do that. I get the feeling that Louis is going to create another triangle where initially it was him, Lestat, and Claudia, and now it's going to be him, Armond, and Claudia.
I actually read that scene in the van differently. I think he was being honest, but I think he was saying it honestly to both of them. I think the problem that they're having is like they keep trying to force him to choose. And I think that he 100% means what he is saying about both of them. And he cherishes them both. But he's been put in a position because of his own choices and the choices of Lestat and the choices of Claudia that is forcing him to decide between the two. And I think that's just an impossible choice for him.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I read that. So I think he was being honest. I think he meant what he said to Claudia. I think truly, if it really was just you, I think that would be enough. And also to Lestat, if it really was just you, that would be enough. I do think it's different from Lestat in the beginning because it's not possessive. He's offering that as a source of comfort for her. Like,
yeah,
I'm 100% okay if we don't find what we're looking for and it's just me and you. But I don't need to be the only person you have.
I think at the beginning of episode 1, though, I think she was aware that he hadn't moved on from Lestat. Mm-hmm. To me, I read that scene in the train as him letting her know, I've let him go, which I don't think that's true.
Oh, yeah, I would agree with that.
Because he doesn't mention Lestat at all. He says, like, it's me and you, which feels like I've severed ties with my past, and it's us moving forward. Because he gets on board with her plan, which is something like very forward-thinking, very futuristic. I think he says it, one, he does mean it, but I think he also says, like, if I don't fully commit to Claudia, or at least let her feel like I'm fully committing to her exclusively, like, she will leave. Mm-hmm. Which he kind of says, like, you know, like, please don't go running off again like you've done before. And I think he realizes, well, if Claudia leaves, then what I did to Lestat would have all been in vain.
I'd agree with that. That's a good point. Like maybe he's lying with his implication.
Right.
But I think he means the words that he says.
Yeah. I would agree to that.
I do think, Claudia girl, you don't think the fact that he chose Paris is a sign that he hasn't let it go? Like, I don't know. There was a plethora of cities in Europe that he could have picked, and he picked the one.
Yeah.
Like, come on. The true reason why they went to Paris is because that's where Lestat is from. Mm-hmm. Come on, Louis. You were looking, even if maybe it was on a subconscious level. Maybe I don't know. There. Maybe you were suppressing it, but I think you were looking for a place that connects you to him because you're not ready to say goodbye. And I think that's fine. I mean, not fine because it's
normal.
Not a healthy relationship, but yes, normal. Also, like, you should feel guilt.
Yes.
About what you did. And Claudia, you should too, my friend. But I feel like they did the same thing again in this episode where, like, as their relationship, Louis and Claudia's relationship is healing, now the world around them is reflecting that in the same way that Eastern Europe was sort of reflecting their dynamics. Paris is reflecting that too. Yeah. It is at that time a place of optimism. There's lots of culture. There's lots of creative innovation happening in that city at that time. So it makes sense for that to be the backdrop for this chapter of their lives where they are about to step into like a very similar phase, like a building phase, a creating phase rather than a destructive phase.
Yeah, I want to ask you this because I've been hesitant to think of this because it reminds us of other conversations that we've had. The overall story, you could say, is like an allegory for like queerness. They added the racial component into it. That reminded me a little bit of like when I listen to queer people when like they're at drag shows or when they...
I literally wrote that exact same thing, yeah.
But isn't it always a little bit weird that like underneath it all, like they are inherently more dangerous because they are vampires, and that whenever people try to make that allegory, I always cringe a little bit because there's always going to be that slight justification of yes, but they can still do X, Y, and Z. Like it reminded me of when we were talking about X-Men a little bit also. Yes. I haven't wanted to lean into that allegory hard because of that. Now I think they're doing a good job of like drawing clear distinctions that like there's good and there's bad vampires the same way there's good and bad humans, but like there's still a level of superiority that the vampires have like inherently now because of what they're capable of.
Yeah, I think this is just a problem with whenever you try to draw an allegory between a real world experience and a supernatural one, it just always happens.
Maybe we just...
Specifically when you try to make that allegory about a real life oppressed and ostracized group of people with an ostracized supernatural race. Like, every time you have this problem.
I guess I'm wondering, is there a better way to make this allegory then?
I don't know. I feel like we haven't seen it done.
That's exactly what I was thinking while we were watching this episode. Because I know like fans, some of our followers told us with the X-Men one, like, the allegory works better because there's like Avengers and other superheroes present, and the juxtaposition between them and the mutants makes it land a little bit better. But still, the difference is biologically mutants were born that way. That I think is always going to be something that, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's like the Zootopia problem. It's like, you made this movie about race, but you made the people that represent Black people actual dangerous predator animals. It's like,
I don't know. No,
but, I don't think there's a way around it.
But the scene when Claudia goes to the theater, that did feel like the first time like perhaps like a younger queer person is exposed to a community where they're like their full authentic self, which I can see how that would be meaningful if you were to look at from that scene alone. But with the full context, you're like...
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good example of when people find communities where the parts of themselves that they've been made to feel most ashamed of suddenly become things that are celebrated.
Right. And I guess what I'm wondering, is there a way to do that in an allegory? Can the feelings land hard if the reality like isn't found? Like, I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, you are making sense. The problem is that in the show, what they've been made to feel ashamed of is being murderers.
That's what I'm saying.
So it's like, here's how I think about it. If you have built the world in such a way that if I was a human being in that world, I would have a reasonable reason to be afraid of this group of people, you messed up, okay? As a person, living in the world of the X-Men, it is reasonable for me to be fearful of a group of people that have supernatural abilities and I do not know their intentions with them, right? Like, that's not unreasonable. You can say like, yeah, but they do good things with them. That's true. They're not all bad, but it's not unreasonable for me to be like, that person has super strength. That person can read my mind. I'm afraid of that person. That's very reasonable.
Yeah.
Same thing with vampires. It is very reasonable for me to be afraid of vampires.
And it's not the same thing as like, oh, I'm afraid of him because he's a black man. Like, that's not.
No, like it's unreasonable to be afraid of people who are queer just because they are queer. It's unreasonable to be afraid of people who are black just because they are black. But it is not unreasonable to be afraid of a supernatural being just because they are supernatural. That's the problem.
Well, here's what I would say though, because in season 4 of Attack on Titan, side note, the only reason why I brought up Attack on Titan is I had been rewatching it a couple of weeks ago, but their powers were becoming a little obsolete. Like, technology was starting to catch up to them with how they could easily defeat them with, like, they found technology that could easily wipe out their napes.
In terms of war, yes.
Well, I guess the things have equaled out. Where does the allegory then work if there is an inadequate level of defense that non-Eldians then had? No, because as an everyday regular person in that world, I still have reason to be afraid of an Eldian who can turn into a Titan. But you know that the power scale is semi-equal now.
The power scale is equal at
like government
level. But me as an individual person, it still is reasonable for me to be like, that person has the ability to turn into a giant monster that eats people alive. Like, I should be afraid of them.
I only had one other thing. The difference between how Louis was introduced to Armond versus how Louis was introduced to Lestat, I think was very interesting. Initially, I was like, nah, like, kind of what Daniel was saying, like kind of like a sloppy seconds, like, oh, like you're coming in as like a like you're
rebound.
Like a rebound sort of a thing. But then they dropped the idea that they've actually been together longer than he was with Lestat, so maybe there's like a genuine thing there. And then I'm also like, the way that Louis was initially like sort of introduced, I don't know how else to say it, it felt more human. It felt a little bit more caring. It felt a little bit more, I'm not trying to sway you just off of curiosity. I'm introducing myself to you out of real care. That leaves me a little bit more intrigued by Armond, because I still don't know what to make of him, but for some reason I found myself trusting him the same way Louis did, you know?
Yeah. This is what it reminds me of. Like, there's a lot of like rom-coms, like romantic movies and everything like that, like people grow up on. Specifically, I'll just talk about like teenage girls, because I was a teenage girl. And it romanticized this idea of like a very exciting, sweep you off your feet, dramatic encounter with love, right? That's like presented as kind of dangerous. And then sometimes it can kind of set girls up to look for that. When that's not always like the thing that is the most safe and healthy.
And this is not to say that Armond is perfect. They are clearly hiding a lot. I think we'll reveal a lot of probably some terrible things. But I do think that introduction felt intentional with how we're at least supposed to see that portion of their relationship. Things are a lot more stable with him and Louis. I like him. I'm sorry. He's going to do some terrible things. I could feel it. They're going to reveal things, but I just feel like, and I will name it. And I do feel like a few people said it in our, like on TikTok maybe. I will admit that I am a little bit more protective of Louis than perhaps I should be in the story.
Yes, somebody commented on one of our YouTube videos, the one where we talked about Daniel Malloy and how we felt about him.
Yeah.
And somebody was saying, they were like, my opinion, I think they called it a hot take, which might be, but I think it's true. They were like, my hot take is that when people don't like Daniel Malloy, it's because they are too protective of Louis and they're not willing to like see him honestly.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. I think I need to back off Malloy a little bit. I think he actually is being reasonable.
Yeah, the season 2 so far has sort of revealed even the more you learn about him, I'm a little bit more understanding and empathetic to him.
You forget that he's not on an equal playing field. They reminded us of that in this episode with all the manipulation and the mind reading and he has to be on guard because he knows I'm not on an equal playing field with these people. They have the upper hand, so I have to go in and I have to be very vigilant and I have to be very defensive.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Well, we made it to season 2. Please, just because we made it to season 2, don't go start spoiling stuff in the comment section. Please don't do that. We're only 2 episodes in. But as always, we love to hear your thoughts. Even if we don't reply to all of them, we're always reading them whenever we get a chance to. So please let us know what you thought about these first 2 episodes. Let us know in the comments below. And as always, we'd love it if you could hit that like and subscribe button. It goes a long way in sort of pushing our video out as we try to build this channel. And with that, we will see you all next time. Take care, everyone. Peace.